Raphael had never cried in public, not even when his father died. But that morning, with the scent of wet soil still heavy in the air from the storm the night before, he found himself kneeling beside a crude wooden coffin, his hands trembling as he gripped the handle of the shovel. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting a blue-gray hue across the fields, and there he was, digging a grave with his bare hands, as if he could bury the past along with the body. Gabriel, his older brother, had always been the steady one, the buffer between Raphael and the weight of their father's illness, their mother's exhaustion, and the land that demanded more than it gave. When Gabriel died, it wasn't illness or an accident that took him. It was defeat, the kind of invisible death that creeps in when everything you've built is stolen right in front of you, and you're too powerless to stop it. Raphael's mind screamed as the wooden box lowered into the earth. That box wasn't just holding Gabriel's body. It held decades of sacrifice, of history, of everything their grandfather had worked for. And all of it was gone because a man named Álvaro Dávila knew how to play the system better than they knew how to defend what was theirs. That day, Raphael didn't just lose a brother. He lost the last illusion he had that the world was fair. After the funeral, Raphael didn't stick around to listen to condolences that felt more like insults. He went back to the house, a tiny, crumbling structure that still smelled faintly of his mother's cooking, and the eucalyptus soap his father used before the cancer took everything from him. The papers had been signed months ago, but it still didn't feel real. 60 years of family sweat turned into nothing more than a stamped document transferring their land to Álvaro Dávila. Raphael had watched it happen, powerless, the way people watch fires spread through dry fields, slow at first, then unstoppable. Gabriel had stopped speaking altogether after that. One morning, Raphael found him in bed, eyes open, chest still. It was like his heart had decided it wasn't worth the fight anymore. Raphael packed what little they had, old tools, a few clothes, a photo of his parents, and sold the house. With the money, he bought a bus ticket to Tirana and swore a silent vow he'd repeat every night before sleeping. Never trust anyone named Dávila again. In that new town, he built a life from scratch, working the land by day, sleeping in a storage shed at night, slowly scraping together enough to buy his own small plot. It wasn't much, but it was his, and no one could ever take it from him again. While Raphael was finding peace in silence, Yasmin was growing up in a house where silence was used as a weapon. She was 10 when her mother died, and even then, no one really talked about it. She stood at the edge of the grave in a black dress too big for her, hair pulled into a tight bun by a nanny who didn't speak unless spoken to. Her father, Álvaro Dávila, stood beside her, unreadable. There were no tears. He didn't comfort her. He didn't offer a hand or a word. "Your mother was a good woman," he said, in a tone that felt more like a press release than grief. "Now it's just you and me." That was it. The end of a chapter, the start of a life lived like a company asset, everything monitored, calculated, controlled. Yasmin didn't cry either. She didn't know how. She'd already learned that in their world, emotions were weaknesses. Over the years, she learned to smile at the right times, say the right things, keep her questions to herself. Álvaro taught her that love came with conditions and that silence was safer than asking too much. But there was one place that broke the rules: Tirana. When she was younger, her mother would sneak her away to that town for weekends. There, they'd walk barefoot on the grass, eat pastries from a corner bakery, and laugh out loud without looking over their shoulders. That's where the few good memories lived. And when 11 years later she heard the word Tirana again, spoken by her mother's estate lawyer, it felt like the past reaching back to pull her somewhere she never really wanted to leave. Yasmin was 21, living in a shoebox apartment in São Paulo, when that call came. The lawyer's voice was sterile, polite. Her mother had left a piece of land in Tirana under her name, and they needed her signature to resolve the paperwork. That should have been it. Just another administrative task, in and out. But the name of the town hit her like a whispered secret. Tirana. She hadn't been there in years. Not since her father forbade it after finding out it was the one place his late wife went without his permission. It was the only part of her mother he never managed to erase. Yasmin packed a small suitcase, the kind that fits under bus seats, and bought a ticket for the next morning. She didn't tell her father. She didn't need to. The apartment was rented in her name. The job was remote. The bank account full enough for a few weeks away. At least, that's what she believed. She had no idea that her independence was an illusion, bought and paid for by a man who never stopped keeping score. Yasmin thought she was going to Sarana just to sign a few papers. What she didn't know was that the trip would detonate her entire life, and that someone in that town had waited years to hate her without even knowing her name. The house in Sarana hadn't changed at all. Yasmin stood in front of it, suitcase in hand, as if time had hit pause on everything except her. The same chipped paint, the same heavy curtains, the same iron gate that creaked like it was sighing in disappointment. She hadn't been back in years, but the feeling was instant, like the air itself was thick with memory. She pushed open the gate, half expecting her mother's laughter to echo from somewhere inside, but instead, a voice called out from the stairs. "Welcome back, Yasmin." It was Lorena, her father's second wife, descending with slow, deliberate grace, like a queen surveying her kingdom. Young, polished, and always too composed, Lorena had moved into the house like she'd been rehearsing for the role her whole life. Yasmin's fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. "I'm just here to sort out the papers," she said, tone clipped. Lorena smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "Of course, your mother loved that little land. Always talked about it." The mention of her mother sent a shiver through Yasmin. She didn't want nostalgia. She wanted distance. "I'll go to my old room," she said flatly. Lorena's voice followed her up the stairs, syrupy and sharp at the same time. "I had everything cleaned up for you." It was all exactly the same. Same photos on the wall, same single bed, same mirror above the dresser. But Yasmin wasn't the same. That room used to be a cage dressed as a castle. Now it felt like a museum. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed diploma on the desk. Her father had made sure she checked every box: education, presentation, obedience. But none of it prepared her for who she was without his control. The silence was broken by a phone call. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in years. Carla, her childhood best friend. Yasmin's stomach flipped. "Carla?" she answered, unsure. The voice on the other end was warm, like a blanket pulled over cold feet. "Yasmin, I can't believe it's really you." Carla had vanished from her life the moment Alvaro began tightening his grip, screening every call, monitoring every text. "How did you get my number?" Yasmin asked, suspicion laced in her voice. "Lorena gave it to me," Carla replied casually. That alone made Yasmin's blood run cold. Since when did Lorena hand out her contact details like candy? But Carla sounded genuinely happy. "Guess where I live now? Sarana." The coincidence felt bizarre, but before Yasmin could question it, Carla continued. "There's a rodeo this weekend. You should come. It'll be fun, just like old times." Yasmin hesitated. Fun. She barely remembered what that felt like. "I don't know. I'm only here to sign papers." Carla laughed softly. "Yasmin, when was the last time you did something just for you?" That question hit her harder than she expected. Her whole life had been scheduled, sanitized, scripted, but now, far from the weight of her father's presence, in a place tied more to her mother than to Alvaro, the idea didn't seem so ridiculous. She looked out the window and saw Lorena in the garden, speaking in hushed tones on the phone, gesturing like she was plotting something. "Okay," Yasmin whispered. "Let's go." Saturday night in Sarana felt like stepping into another world. The town square pulsed with music, laughter, and the scent of grilled meat wafting through the warm air. Yasmin stepped out of Carla's car and paused, taking it all in. The dirt arena surrounded by wooden fences, the chatter of people in boots and wide-brimmed hats, the glow of string lights zigzagging overhead. She wore a simple dress and let her hair fall loose over her shoulders. For the first time in years, no one was telling her how to stand, what to say, or when to smile. Carla grabbed her arm, grinning like they were kids again. "See? Told you this place comes alive at night." Yasmin smiled, genuinely this time. There was something disarming about the authenticity around her. No judgment, no whispers behind champagne glasses. Just life, loud and unfiltered. On the other side of the arena, Raphael leaned against the wooden fence, arms crossed, nursing a beer more out of habit than thirst. He wasn't supposed to be there. He hated crowds, preferred the solitude of his land. But João, the older foreman who was practically family by now, had insisted. "You need to breathe, rapaz. Life ain't just plantio and colheita." Raphael had given in, though his mind was still halfway back at the farm. That is, until he saw her. He didn't know her name, didn't know where she was from or what she wanted. All he knew was that she didn't belong there, not in the judgmental way, but in the way someone shines too brightly in a place used to flickering bulbs. She moved differently, like someone used to polished floors and elevators, but her eyes searched the crowd like she was trying to remember how to feel something real. Raphael couldn't look away. She felt it too, his stare. Yasmin turned, eyes scanning until they locked with his. It wasn't flirtation. It was recognition, even if they didn't yet know what they were recognizing. She walked a little slower after that. He stepped away from the fence, beer forgotten, and approached her with a calm that hid the storm inside. "You're not from here," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. "No," Yasmin replied, chin lifted slightly, not in defiance, but in dignity. "And you don't look like someone who enjoys parties." That made him smirk, just a little. Carla noticed the shift in the air between them and, with a knowing look, melted into the crowd. Yasmin and Raphael stood in the middle of the rodeo, the music swelling behind them like a soundtrack they hadn't chosen. "So, why are you here?" he asked. She glanced at the sky, and then back at him. Not sure yet. And somehow, neither of them moved away. The music shifted into a slower rhythm, the kind that pulled couples into a loose sway on the packed dirt floor. Raphael hesitated, but Yasmin didn't. Maybe it was the freedom of the night, the taste of rebellion still sweet on her tongue. Maybe it was the fact that she hadn't felt seen in so long. Either way, when Raphael extended his calloused hand, she took it. At first, they moved awkwardly, her steps too light, his too grounded. But something clicked midway through the song. Her body adjusted to his grip relaxed into hers. Their rhythm aligned like they'd done it before in a different life. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, close to her ear. "Yasmin," she answered, choosing not to offer her last name, instinctively protecting it. "Raphael," he replied, and she filed it away somewhere deeper than memory. "Do you have someone?" he asked. "No. You?" "No." And that was it. No elaborate backstory, no lies, just two people floating for a moment in a bubble made of lights and laughter. Yasmin didn't remember the last time she danced without thinking of who was watching. Raphael didn't remember the last time someone's touch didn't make him recoil. By the time the song ended, the space between them felt intimate in a way that scared them both. "Let's get out of here," Raphael said, not as a question, but a quiet need. Yasmin didn't hesitate. She nodded, and they walked away from the crowd, from expectations, from the lives they carried on their backs like two heavy coats. They didn't speak as they passed the rows of food stands, the flickering lights of parked trucks, and the teenagers laughing over shared drinks. Raphael led the way, his hand brushing against hers just enough to keep the connection alive. They ended up behind one of the barns, near his old truck, out of sight from the noise and neon. He turned to her, his breath catching in his throat. "I don't know you," Yasmin whispered, more to herself than to him. "Me neither," Raphael answered, and that should have been enough to stop them. But it wasn't. Yasmin leaned against the side of the truck, the metal still warm from the afternoon sun. Raphael stepped closer, every inch closing a distance neither of them understood. His fingers touched her face like a question he was too scared to ask. "This is crazy," she murmured. "Yeah," he said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "But it feels like the only thing that makes sense." When he kissed her, it wasn't gentle. It was urgent, raw, desperate, honest, as if they both needed to break something open inside. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about lust. It was about needing to feel real, even for a moment, about silencing the noise inside with something pure. As they disappeared into the shadowed backseat of his truck, two strangers touched like they had nothing to lose. What neither of them knew was that this night, this exact moment, would become the dividing line between who they were and who they would be. The morning after wasn't supposed to mean anything. Yasmin woke before dawn, the truck windows fogged, her dress rumpled, skin still humming from everything they didn't say. Raphael was already awake, sitting on the edge of the truck bed, elbows on his knees, shirt unbuttoned, staring at the horizon like it owed him an explanation. She joined him in silence, their shoulders barely touching. "That was..." she started, but he cut in quietly. "You don't have to say anything." And maybe he was right. Maybe trying to define it would ruin it. But something shifted when she saw his eyes in the morning light. Calmer, but distant. like he was already retreating into himself. She knew that look. She wore it often. Before she could ask what he was thinking, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, sighed, and stood. "I need to go," he said. Yasmin nodded. She reached for her shoes, suddenly aware of how unfamiliar this all was. Raphael paused as if he wanted to say something more, but instead, he just looked at her, really looked at her, like he was memorizing the way she existed in that sliver of time before everything collapsed. "Take care, Yasmin," he said. Then he got in the truck and drove away, leaving her with nothing but the echo of her own name. Raphael didn't make it home before the call came. Jose, his lawyer, sounded too serious for a Saturday morning. "I have an offer for your property," he said, "from a client who wishes to remain anonymous." Raphael narrowed his eyes. "Not interested. It's a generous offer, way above market value." Jose pressed. "He wants an answer today." That triggered something. Raphael had lived through this playbook before. Flashy promises, urgent timelines, buyers who hid behind lawyers and loopholes. "Who is it?" he asked. "Client prefers to remain anonymous," Jose repeated. Raphael's stomach turned. "And if I say no?" There was a pause. He mentioned there are other ways to obtain the land. All legal, of course. That phrase, those exact words. It was like someone had pressed play on a nightmare he thought he'd buried. "I'll call you back." Raphael snapped and ended the call. For the first time in years, his hands trembled. He grabbed the folder with his land documents and rushed to the cartorio. He had to protect what was his. He wouldn't let anyone named Davila take something from him again. Not this land, not his peace, and definitely not whatever it was he felt last night with a woman whose last name he didn't even know yet. The notary office in Serrana was packed, more than Raphael had ever seen on a weekend. The air was thick with the buzz of fans spinning overhead and voices echoing off the tiled walls. Raphael took a number, sat on a cracked plastic chair, and tried to calm the fire building in his chest. The anonymous offer, the urgency, the veiled threat. It was all too familiar. He clenched his jaw, replaying the lawyer's words, feeling the past crawl back onto his skin like a rash. The number board beeped. "Yasmin Serafim Davila," the clerk called out. Raphael froze. The world around him blurred, narrowed to that one name, Davila. He stood slowly, turning his head in disbelief, scanning the room until his eyes landed on her. Yasmin sat 3 chairs ahead, flipping through documents, completely unaware of his presence. The same soft hair he had run his fingers through, the same hands that had traced his skin hours before. And that name, Davila, it hit him like a sucker punch to the gut. All the warmth from the night before drained from his face. He stood, legs stiff, heart pounding, and walked straight to her. The floor felt uneven beneath his boots. "Yasmin," he said. She looked up and smiled. A real bright smile. "Raphael, what are the chances?" she said, as if fate had reunited them for another perfect moment. But Raphael didn't smile back. "Davila," he said, spitting out the name like it tasted bitter. The smile on her face collapsed instantly. Her lips parted in confusion, then fear. "Raphael, I can explain." "Can you?" he said, stepping closer, his voice louder than he intended. "Then explain how your family always gets what it wants." Murmurs spread through the office. Heads turned. Yasmin stood, hands shaking. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," he interrupted. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage buried for over a decade. "You showed up out of nowhere, just before I get a mysterious offer for my land, and you think I'm stupid enough to believe that's a coincidence?" Yasmin's face drained of color. "What offer? I don't know anything about that." "Of course not," he snapped. "And what was last night? Strategy? Seduction? Another Davila trick?" The pain in her eyes flickered into disbelief. "No, I didn't know who you were, I swear. I just—" "Exactly. You didn't know. But I did. The moment I heard your name, it all made sense. You're Alvaro Davila's daughter." His voice cracked. "The man who destroyed my family, who killed my brother, piece by piece." Yasmin's eyes welled with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. But Raphael had already turned away. "Get out. Now. Before I say something I can't take back." The room was dead silent. Everyone watched her gather her papers with trembling hands and walk out like a ghost. Raphael stood there, breathing like a bull ready to charge. But when the door clicked shut behind her, something unfamiliar crept into his chest. Doubt. Yasmin didn't remember how she made it back to the house. The walk was a blur, her body moving on autopilot while her mind spun out of control. The tears came later, in the bathroom, after she locked the door and collapsed onto the cold tile floor. Her entire body shook. The shame burned deeper than anything she'd ever felt, more than her father's constant judgment, more than her stepmother's manipulations. Raphael hadn't just rejected her. He had shredded her open, accused her of being everything she feared she was, just another pawn in the Davila legacy. She wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. For 3 days, she stayed locked in her old bedroom, curtains drawn, lights off, barely eating. Her father didn't ask where she'd been. Lorena only knocked once, delivering a tray of untouched food. But Yasmin wasn't just heartbroken, she was lost. And then came the nausea. At first, she thought it was stress. Then it got worse. The smell of perfume made her gag. Food she normally loved turned her stomach. And when she counted the days, the truth hit her like a truck. She hadn't had a period since before the rodeo. Her blood went cold. No, it couldn't be. Not now. Not after everything. But her body didn't lie. And deep down, she already knew. She was pregnant with Raphael's child. The test confirmed it. 2 red lines that might as well have been carved into her skin. Yasmin stared at the stick in her trembling hands, the silence in the bathroom pressing against her ears like static. Pregnant, at 21, alone, with nothing. Her body folded in on itself as she sobbed, not just from fear, but from the gut-wrenching realization that the one person who needed to know would never believe her. Raphael hated her. He thought she had played him. To him, this child would be nothing more than a trap. Telling her father was out of the question. Alvaro Davila didn't allow messes in his empire, and an illegitimate pregnancy wasn't a complication he'd tolerate. Yasmin knew what he'd do: cut her off, erase her from the family, maybe worse. Lorena would watch it all unfold with a smirk, so she stayed quiet. But Lorena wasn't stupid. She noticed the pale face, the subtle way Yasmin rested her hand on her stomach when she thought no one was watching. 3 days later, Lorena knocked on Alvaro's study door with a concerned tone and a fake sympathetic frown. "I think Yasmin might be pregnant," she said, letting the words hang in the air like perfume laced with poison. Alvaro looked up from his laptop slowly, as if hearing a language he didn't quite understand. "What did you say?" She repeated it, gently, like it was his idea. That night, Yasmin's world would unravel in a way that made the confrontation at the cartorio feel like a warm-up. Alvaro didn't scream. That wasn't his style. He summoned Yasmin to the main living room with a sharp knock and the kind of voice he used in business meetings when things went south. Controlled, lethal. She walked down the stairs slowly, every step like a countdown. He stood by the window, arms crossed, staring into the garden as if trying to find a solution in the trimmed hedges. "Sit," he said without turning. Yasmin sat on the edge of the sofa, her fingers gripping the cushion. He finally faced her, eyes sharp behind designer glasses. "Is it true?" She didn't answer at first, but her silence was all he needed. "Who is it?" he asked, quieter this time. "It doesn't matter," she said. "He wants nothing to do with me." That changed something in his expression. Not compassion, strategy. Alvaro paced once, then stopped. "You're going to fix this," quietly. Yasmin stared at him. "Fix this?" "Yes, I'll make some calls. There are private clinics, very discreet. This won't affect your future." She stood up so fast the coffee table rattled. "No." One word, firm, final. Alvaro blinked. "You don't have a choice, Yasmin. You live in a world where mistakes cost everything." "Then I'll pay for it myself," she snapped. "With what money?" he asked, and just like that, he made his move. Alvaro picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Suspend all of Yasmin's cards, access to her accounts, everything." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket with the same calm used to sign contracts. "Welcome to the real world," he said coldly. Yasmin stood there frozen, her heart pounding like a war drum. She wanted to believe it was a bluff, but deep down, she knew it wasn't. Her life, the apartment in Sao Paulo, the bank accounts, even the health insurance, was all under her father's control. She had nothing. "You think that makes me give up?" she said, voice shaky. Alvaro didn't even flinch. "It makes you realistic." He walked past her like she was invisible, but something cracked inside her, something permanent. For 21 years she believed she had choices, that her education, her polished image, her freedom were hers, but it was all borrowed. Now, stripped of every safety net, she was finally free, but in the most terrifying way possible. She climbed the stairs in silence, each step echoing like a funeral bell. In her room, she stared at the walls covered in smiling photographs of a girl who no longer existed. She knew she couldn't stay. Not in that house. Not in that name. The baby growing inside her didn't have a room in Alvaro's empire. It would be born unwanted, erased before its first breath if he had his way. So she made a decision. Not out of courage, but desperation. She packed a small backpack with the few things that were truly hers: ID, a crumpled photo of her mother, and a couple hundred reais in cash. Then she picked up her phone and did something she hadn't done in years. She called someone she actually trusted. "Carla," she whispered when the voice answered. "I need help." Carla didn't ask for details on the phone. She didn't have to. The panic in Yasmin's voice was enough. "Come," she said. "Rodoviaria de Ribeirão Preto. I'll be there at 10. Yasmin hung up and stared around her childhood bedroom one last time. Everything in that room, every book, every dress, every framed diploma, felt like it belonged to someone else. The version of her that smiled on the walls was gone, replaced by a woman with a heartbeat inside her and nowhere to go. She crept down the stairs like a thief, flinching with every creak of the wood, heart pounding in her ears. Alvaro was in his office, door closed. Lorena's TV buzzed low from the other end of the house. At the front door, Yasmin paused. Her hand rested on the handle. One breath in, one breath out. Then she turned it. The door clicked open, and with that soft sound, she crossed an invisible line she could never return from. The streets were quiet, the bus station colder than she remembered. People shuffled past her with worn duffel bags and tired eyes. She sat on a bench and wrapped her arms around herself. She wasn't special anymore, just another girl running from something. When Carla's old hatchback pulled up, Yasmin didn't speak. Carla just stepped out, opened her arms, and Yasmin folded into them like a child. They didn't talk on the drive to Sarana. Some wounds didn't need narration. Carla's house was small, peeling paint, patched furniture, nothing fancy, but it radiated something Yasmin hadn't felt in years: warmth without expectation. No one analyzing her posture, her tone, her choices. Just a woman who meant it when she said, "You can stay here as long as you need." Yasmin slept for the first time in weeks that night, curled up on a lumpy mattress in Carla's spare room, one hand on her belly. But peace didn't last. The next morning, reality slammed back in. She was still pregnant, still broke, still jobless, and now, hiding from the most powerful man she knew. Carla worked long hours and had a husband to think about. Yasmin couldn't impose forever, but every time she considered applying for a job or asking for help, she froze. Who would hire her like this? Who would believe her if she said the child wasn't some elaborate Davila scheme? She needed a plan, but had no idea where to start. Then came the thought she tried to avoid, the one name that kept circling her brain like a vulture: Rafael. She didn't want to see him, didn't want to beg, but the truth was, he was the only person who shared responsibility for the life growing inside her. She didn't expect kindness, just honesty. So she asked Carla if she knew a man named Rafael who worked land outside town. The reaction was immediate. "Rafael Serafim?" Carla asked, her eyes widening. "He's intense, private, but yeah, everyone here knows who he is." The dirt road to Rafael's farm stretched ahead like a gauntlet. Yasmin walked it slowly, each step a mixture of dread and determination. She rehearsed her words in her head, trying to find the right tone, the one that wouldn't sound like begging, wouldn't sound like a trap. She clutched her backpack tighter, as if it held more than clothes, as if it might somehow carry her courage. The sun was high and sweat trickled down her back, but she didn't stop. She had no choice. The small farmhouse came into view, a modest structure with a tiled roof and faded paint, surrounded by tilled soil, and a quiet that felt heavier than silence. She stood at the gate for a full minute, her heart pounding. Then, finally, she lifted her hand and knocked. A pause, then footsteps, firm and familiar. Rafael opened the door, his shirt stained with work and his hair messy from the sun. He froze. For a second, all the layers of anger and betrayal flickered in his eyes. His gaze dropped instinctively to her stomach, still barely showing, but maybe, somehow, already visible to him. "What are you doing here?" he asked, voice rough. Yasmin swallowed hard. "I need to talk to you." He didn't answer, just stepped aside. Not an invitation, not warmth, just decency. The inside of the house was exactly what she imagined. Simple, clean, worn in all the right places. Yasmin stood near the doorway, afraid to move too far in. Raphael didn't offer her a seat. He leaned against the table, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "I'm pregnant," she said quietly. The words hung there like a bell ringing in a church no one wanted to enter. He didn't flinch, but something flickered across his face. Shock, maybe, or disbelief. "It's yours," she added, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. He looked away for a second, jaw tightening. "Prove it," he muttered, and the words sliced through her. Yasmin blinked. "What? You want me to believe this isn't some Davila trick?" he snapped. "That you just happened to show up, get close, and now, what? A baby appears out of nowhere." The words stung worse than she imagined. "Do you think I'd be here? Alone? Like this? If it was part of some plan?" Raphael didn't answer. He was staring at her now. Really staring. Like he was trying to peel back layers of skin with his eyes. "Why should I trust you?" Yasmin's throat burned. "Because I left everything behind. Because I have nowhere else to go. Because it's the truth." She didn't cry. She wouldn't give him that. "When the baby is born, do whatever test you want. But right now, I just need somewhere to exist." Raphael didn't move, didn't speak. Then after a long, unbearable silence, he sighed. "Fourth room in the back. It was my mother's. That was it. No comfort, no promises. Just a door that didn't close in her face." The room smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, and the bed creaked when she sat down. Yasmin stared at the faded floral wallpaper, trying to breathe normally. She hadn't expected warmth from Raphael, but the coldness still stung. He hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened, but the look in his eyes, like she was a threat that had slipped through a crack, felt worse than any insult. She lay down on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Her body was exhausted, her mind even more. The silence of the house was heavy, broken only by the occasional sound of Raphael moving outside. Tools clinking, boots on dirt, the kind of rhythm that only comes from a life built with your own hands. She didn't know what would happen next, didn't know if she'd last a night there, let alone months, but it was the only place she had. That night she heard Raphael in the kitchen. The fridge opened, water poured. No words, just presence. She stayed in her room, in the dark, wondering if this was rock bottom or the beginning of something else entirely. The next morning, Raphael was gone before sunrise. A mug of coffee had been left on the counter. One, not two. She drank water from the faucet and sat on the porch, unsure if she was allowed to breathe too loudly in his space. That was their routine in the beginning. Silent cohabitation. Two people orbiting around each other, never touching, barely speaking, but neither pushing the other out. It was on the third morning that everything cracked open again. Yasmin woke with a familiar wave of nausea and barely made it to the bathroom in time. The retching echoed through the hallway. When she opened the door, pale and shaking, Raphael was standing outside. He didn't say anything, just stared. "I'm fine," she muttered, wiping her mouth. He didn't believe her, but he didn't push either. He turned away and walked to the kitchen. Later that day, she found a bottle of prenatal vitamins by the sink, then fruit in the fridge, then tea bags in the cupboard. He never mentioned them, never said he bought anything. But every day something new appeared. Raphael wasn't warm, but he wasn't cruel. He was present in a way she didn't expect. Silent, observing, guarded. She wasn't sure if he was doing it out of guilt or obligation, or something he couldn't name. She tried to stay out of his way, cooked small meals, swept the floor, folded the towels without being asked. One night she found him asleep on the porch chair, his boots still on, a book about newborn care open on his chest. That was the first night she cried in silence, not from sadness, but from the slow, impossible realization that maybe, just maybe, this man who didn't want her near might care about the life growing inside her more than he realized. The days began folding into each other, like pages of a chapter neither of them knew how to write. Raphael still left early every morning, returning with dirt under his fingernails and sweat on his brow. Yasmin stayed behind, keeping the house in order, doing what she could with the little energy pregnancy left her. They barely spoke, yet something began to shift. The silences were less sharp, more like pauses than walls. One afternoon, she was sitting on the front steps peeling an orange when he returned from the fields. His shirt clung to his chest, soaked with honest labor. He looked at her belly, now unmistakably rounded beneath the soft cotton of her dress. "How's it going?" he asked, the question awkward, like a foreign language on his tongue. "Better today," she said, surprised he'd spoken first. "He's been kicking more." Raphael nodded, and for a second his hand twitched, like he wanted to feel it but didn't trust himself. "That's good," he said, and walked past her into the house. But that night there were 2 mugs on the table, coffee and tea. The next morning she found a stack of folded baby clothes on the couch. No note, just a quiet gesture that said everything he didn't know how to say. And for the first time in weeks, Yasmin smiled while folding laundry. Then came the moment that neither of them could pretend around anymore. Yasmin was on the back porch, humming softly and rubbing her belly when Gabriel kicked. Hard, a full roll that made her gasp. Raphael, who'd been repairing the fence nearby, looked up. "Was that?" She nodded. "Wanna feel?" The offer surprised him. He hesitated, wiped his hands on his jeans, and walked over. Yasmin took his hand and placed it gently on her stomach. The baby moved again, as if responding to his touch. Raphael's eyes widened, mouth parting just slightly. "He's strong," he murmured. "Like his father," Yasmin said before she could stop herself. They both froze. He didn't pull his hand away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to understand the weight of everything unsaid. "You're sure?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. She nodded. There hasn't been anyone else. Silence stretched between them, not awkward this time, but full of possibility, full of fear, full of something neither dared to name. He didn't say anything else, just kept his hand there a moment longer, until the baby shifted and settled. Then, with a quiet nod, he turned back to the fence. But that night, after she went to bed, Yasmin heard him pacing outside her door. Not angry, not anxious, just unsure. And in his hesitation, she saw something else growing too. Something just as fragile as the baby inside her. Trust. It was the night after that when something changed. Not loud or dramatic, but undeniable. Yasmin came down for a glass of water and found Raphael at the kitchen table, hunched over a pile of crumpled papers and a calculator. He looked up, startled. "Couldn't sleep," she said, reaching for a clean glass. "Me neither," he replied. She leaned against the counter, watching him from across the room. "What's all that?" "Numbers," he said, trying to figure out how to stretch everything once the baby comes. He rubbed his eyes and sat back, defeated. "It's a lot." Yasmin stepped forward, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down. "You don't have to do this alone." Raphael looked up, meeting her gaze for what felt like the first time in days. "I don't know how to do it any other way," he admitted. The words hit her harder than she expected. She understood that. The quiet survival. The lone wolf mindset. She'd lived it too. "We're both scared," she said softly. "Doesn't mean we can't try together." Raphael didn't respond right away, but something in his shoulders eased. The air between them felt different now, less like a standoff, more like a surrender. Not to weakness, but to possibility. That night they didn't kiss, didn't touch, but they sat at the table for hours, building bridges out of stories they had once been too afraid to tell. Days turned into weeks, and with every sunrise the lines between them blurred a little more. They shared groceries, chores, conversations, small things. Yasmin started cooking meals Raphael remembered from his childhood. She had found a cookbook in the cabinet and filled the kitchen with the smell of memories he didn't realize he missed. He started staying inside longer in the mornings, helping her wash dishes, offering back rubs when her feet swelled. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was care. It was closeness. Then one night, as a summer storm rolled in, she asked him a question she had been carrying for days. "What would you name him?" Raphael looked up from where he was drying dishes. "Gabriel," he said immediately. "After my brother." Yasmin swallowed. "It's perfect." Lightning flashed outside and thunder rumbled through the wooden beams of the house. Raphael moved toward her, slow, deliberate. "I still don't know what this is," he said. "Me neither," she whispered, "but I don't want to run from it." He reached out, brushed her hair behind her ear, and for the first time kissed her without urgency. It was soft, careful, like he didn't want to break the moment. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. There was no need. The silence said it all. Whatever this was, it had already taken root. The next few weeks moved like a dream neither of them dared to wake from. Mornings began with shared silence over coffee and chamomile tea. Evenings were filled with small rituals, massaging her swollen ankles, folding freshly washed baby clothes, brushing fingertips across the fabric of the crib Raphael built by hand in the small corner room they decided would be Gabriel's. They didn't define what they were, didn't talk about what came after, but it didn't matter. There was a peace in the not knowing, in the simple presence of each other. Yasmin laughed more. Raphael smiled more. Even the neighbors noticed. One evening, as the stars bloomed across the sky, Yasmin stood barefoot in the grass, her belly round and taut, and Raphael watched her like she was something sacred. "You're glowing," he said, and she rolled her eyes. "I'm sweating," she corrected. "Glowing sounds nicer," he replied with a grin. Then she took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. "Say hi to your son." The baby kicked in perfect timing, and Raphael chuckled in awe. "He already knows I'm here." Yasmin leaned into him, and for a moment, neither of them was afraid. They were just a man and a woman, standing in the dark, ready to rewrite their past through a child that neither had planned for, but both had already come to love. Labor started just before dawn, as Yasmin stood in the kitchen slicing papaya. A sharp, unfamiliar pain gripped her back and wrapped around her middle like a belt tightening. She dropped the knife and gripped the counter. "Raphael," she called out, her voice thin. He appeared instantly, eyes wide. "It's time," she whispered. Chaos followed. Controlled, practiced chaos. Raphael had prepared. He grabbed the hospital bag, guided her to the truck, and broke every speed limit on the way into town. Yasmin's breathing was erratic, but she didn't cry. She gritted her teeth through each contraction, clutching his hand like a lifeline. At the hospital, nurses swept her away while Raphael filled out forms with trembling fingers. "Relationship to patient?" someone asked. He paused, pen hovering. He choked, then cleared his throat. "I'm the father." The nurse nodded and scribbled. He was led into the delivery room just in time to see Yasmin gripping the rails of the bed, drenched in sweat, her face twisted in agony. "You don't have to stay," she gasped. "I do," he said. "I want to." And he meant it. He held her hand through every scream, every curse, every tear. Hours passed like lifetimes until finally, a cry split the room. The doctor held up a tiny, wrinkled boy with dark hair and lungs full of fire. Raphael stared in awe. "Gabriel," he whispered, the name barely holding all the love swelling inside his chest. The nurse placed the baby in his arms, and just like that, he was no longer just Raphael. He was a father. Raphael sat beside Yasmin's hospital bed, watching her sleep with their newborn nestled against her chest. The light coming through the blinds painted soft lines across her face, and for the first time, he saw her not just as the woman who had appeared in his life like a storm, but as someone who had survived one. Yasmin had lost everything: family, comfort, certainty, and still chose to carry life, still chose to fight. Gabriel squirmed in her arms, tiny fists stretching, face scrunching. Raphael reached out and gently touched his son's hand. It was impossibly small, impossibly real. All the walls he'd built, all the hate he'd carried, felt like relics from a different life. Yasmin stirred. Her eyes met his. No words, none needed. Just the kind of silence that speaks louder than anything else. "He's ours," she whispered. Raphael nodded. "Ours." It wasn't just biology. It was something bigger, an unspoken commitment to this little life they'd created and the family they were slowly becoming. The past still hung around the edges of the room, like shadows that hadn't quite faded. But in that moment, they weren't just survivors of pain. They were builders of something new, something fragile, something real. Back at the farm, weeks later, the rhythm of life resumed, but nothing was the same. Raphael no longer walked the fields alone. Gabriel was often strapped to his chest in a carrier, gurgling as his father worked. Yasmin sat on the porch most afternoons, rocking slowly, notebook in hand, jotting down ideas for a small organic stand they wanted to open together at the market. It wasn't perfect. Money was tight. Gabriel cried at all hours. And there were still days when Raphael's old anger crept back in like a bad habit. But it was theirs. A life born from the unlikeliest night, from people who were never meant to meet. And yet, somehow, here they were. On clear nights, they sat outside with Gabriel between them, watching the stars. Sometimes Raphael would reach for her hand. Sometimes Yasmin would lean her head on his shoulder. And every time Gabriel stirred, both of them moved at once. Instinct, reflex, love. Not the kind from stories. The kind that grows slowly, stubbornly, refusing to be undone. Yasmin would never forget what it took to get there. The shame, the anger, the loneliness. But neither would she forget that one night a closed door had opened, and everything after that had changed her life forever. If you've ever loved someone in silence, or built something from nothing, or found family where you least expected, then you'll understand. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was real. And sometimes, real is the most beautiful kind of miracle.